Midnight Patriot Nation. Spartan here, and it's time for another installment of the Liberty Virus via the Midnight Moment Delivery System. Tonight was night 3 of the Democrat National Convention, and day 160 of 15 days to flatten the curve. What little I was unlucky enough to overhear made me throw up in my mouth a little bit. Gotta be honest with you, I wanted to wash the taste out with Drano. But in the end, I settled for a nice cup of coffee. You know, George Carlin once said, I don't have pet peeves, I have major psychotic fucking hatreds. So in the spirit of both George Carlin and my complete and total annoyance with current events, we're going to cover 2 topics with you tonight. The first is voter ID, and the second is a self-developed conspiracy theory that I would like your indulgence to entertain as strictly a mental exercise. So in our society, there are things you have to show ID for. Buying a gun, getting prescription painkillers, buying alcohol, buying weed, where it's legal, of course, buying porn. You have to show ID at the DMV, to board an airplane, to board a train, to drive an automobile. The list goes on and on and on. So if ID is going to be required to do any of the above things or, conduct adulting in any way, as it always is.
What?
Why do states not have a statute that requires valid identification to vote?
Busted.
Ask yourself that question for a second, and you may not like the answer. Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution states, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senator. There was an assumption clearly present in our Constitution that citizens' right to vote is protected under free speech under the First Amendment. But again, a citizen's right to vote. Article 2, Section 1 clearly spells out that our founders and framers specified who could and couldn't be president. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of this adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of the president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and have 14 years been a resident within the United States. Our founders and framers carved out specifics. Do you really believe they had any intention at all for non-citizens to vote in our elections? Give me a break. So if they're going to push the agenda, and by the way, I'm speaking to leftists and liberals who seem to think that showing identification at a polling place is somehow minority voter suppression.
Oh, really?
Then I say, well, no ID to vote, no ID to buy guns, no background checks ever for anything, no ID to buy booze or weed or board a plane. Is it any wonder that liberal states have started issuing driver's license to illegal immigrants? Because if somehow, some way, we restore common sense and order to our republic and require a valid form of identification to vote, illegal immigrants will be their voters in their voting block. Now, I'm not suggesting we give up the right to an anonymous ballot. That's absolutely protected by the First Amendment. I get it. No one is stating that your driver's license number be attached to your ballot. But if you can't get into a bar without ID, if you can't buy liquor without ID, why should you be able to access the polling place?
Aha!
I just want to point out and make it clear the blatant, outright, shit-eating hypocrisy and, quite frankly, leftist racism and the claim that somehow requiring an ID to vote is minority suppression. Really? Here in Colorado, most liquor stores that I frequent require ID for every transaction. And believe me, I do not look 21 or younger. Bars and nightclubs in this area often use a barcode scanner to validate ID, and I know that it's that way in some other states too. Somehow all of this is okay, but somehow requiring an ID to vote, arguably the most violent action in the world, voting, is minority voter suppression and racist. Bullshit. And so is the assertion that minorities, by the way, don't have an ID or don't have the ability or are somehow incapable of getting one. To bring up specificity again, in Arizona, all adults over the age of 18 are required to carry ID at all times. That's whether you're walking down the street, driving a car, or otherwise. And that law has been in effect since World War II. This is not something new. This is not something that the Clintons or the Bushes or anyone else did anytime in recent history. This has been the law of the land for literally decades. Now, whether that law is right or wrong is up to you. But really, do we really need any more outside influence in our country, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you stand on? All right, guys, we got another segment coming up right after this brief break. Stay tuned. Midnight Patriot Nation, Spartan here with a shameless plug for our new gear shop, shop.midnightpatriots.com.
Surprise!
T-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs, phone cases, and just about everything else in between, we got you covered. Whether you're looking to embrace your insomnia, show your patriotism, or make a liberal's head explode.
Oh, really?
Shop.midnightpatriots.com. For limited time, you can save 15% on your order starting now. And now, back to the show. So what I'd like to talk about now is a conspiracy theory. I fully admit it. I have no evidence of this except what may be going on around us and some thoughts that I have from the golden age of talk radio in the 90s. I sometimes get what I refer to as nuggets of universal truth from what most people would consider fairly odd sources, movies, songs, sports, overhearing, pieces of a conversation, etc. One of the things that was kind of profound to me and rang true and I didn't really understand at the time was the movie Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Now, there's a scene, and again, props to Marvel because they're fantastic. And I'm going to summarize here. There's a scene when they're in a bunker and they're talking to basically an old German scientist. Its brain has been put on a computer. I know, a little bit creepy. But in that scene, they talk about humanity's freedom. Okay. And one of the things that they said was, if you try to take that freedom, they resist. Humanity needed to surrender its freedom willingly. And they finally created a world so chaotic that humanity was ready to surrender its freedom for its own security. Now, I know that sounds bizarre, and maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe I'm suffering from the COVID lockdown paranoia, or whatever you want to call it. But understand this: if you wanted to usher in a Gestapo-type national police force that had no loyalty to the Constitution, but only to politicians, kind of like Nazi Germany, what would you do? Well, first of all, you'd have to get the police to quit. So if you control the purse strings for the police department, what better way to get them to quit than to cut their wages, cut their budget, and then make them liable for, everything? What if you told them to stand down while, like Portland, 83 nights of rioting destroys property, assaulting citizens? Would that get the police to quit? What about like New York? They cut the budget of major crimes unit, and shootings have gone up 200-300% since that happened. Now, I want to make it clear that I do not support a national police force. Okay. Now, yes, we can all argue that, yes, we have federal agents, the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, etc. But none of them are actively patrolling the streets. But how do you do it? How do you implement a Gestapo of social justice warriors that are essentially thought police, which is what the leftists seem to want? Anyone that goes contrary to their narrative, anyone that disagrees with anything they say politically, well, if you get all the local cops to quit, you have to have something, because your citizens will now beg for protection. Somebody that is friendly to that idea wins the White House. Then the federal police force is created. And then we do end up like Nazi Germany. And they're already talking about making kids wear buttons to identify that they either have or have not been vaccinated for COVID-19. Why not just go out and do yellow stars and pink triangles? Doesn't make any sense, does it? You have to question yourself and even do the mental exercise of what's the end game to all this shit. I got to tell you, none of it looks good. So that was your mental exercise in your midnight moment. I'm Spartan. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Midnight Moment. Be sure to join us for the main podcast every Monday night and every Thursday night for more Midnight Moments. If you like what you hear and support what we do, how about subscribing? Go to listen.midnightpatriots.com, click support, and subscribe. Be sure to pick up some merch at our gear store, shop.midnightpatriots.com. From the Mile High Command Center, the papertopriceless.com studio, this is Spartan reminding you that the Constitution is not just a suggestion.